Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Brenton. I'm a freelance filmmaker and DP, and today we're going to talk about why I bought a Red camera. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I love to talk about cameras, gear, lighting, memory cards, whatever it is. I love to talk about it, and I love to learn, and I want to teach other people what I know about cameras. So today we are talking about why I bought a Red camera, and it is not the Komodo X. This is the Red Weapon Helium. So this camera was released in 2016, and it was either an upgrade path from Dragon or a standalone camera for $50,000, which is a crazy amount of money. Today, these cameras go for a lot less. On B&H, you can get them for about $22,000, and on the used market on eBay, you can get them for around $14,000 or $15,000. I got this camera on ShareGrid, which is one of my favorite sites to browse used gear on, for less than the price of a new Komodo X. So less than $10,000, which was the reason I got this camera instead of Komodo X. So this camera's been used to shoot a lot of big movies and some Netflix dramas. Netflix used this camera a ton after it came out. Lots of documentaries and lots of talking head pieces have all been shot with the helium sensor. So what's inside this camera? Inside the Red Weapon Helium is an 8K Super 35 sensor. And it's a little bit bigger than Super 35, I've noticed. A lot of lenses I have will actually vignette if they're more like an older Super 35 lens, and I'll have to crop into about 7K. So I believe 7K is closer to the actual Super 35 standard format for like a 3-perf kind of format. But this sensor is a little bit taller, which is actually beneficial to stuff like anamorphic shooting, where you need a taller sensor. A lot of the Alexa cameras, like the Alexa Mini, have taller sensors. They're sort of a 4-perf Super 35 sensor, and that allows you to capture a little bit more of the image on an anamorphic lens. So if you're shooting with something like the Cooke anamorphics, you can actually get a 5K image out of this camera, which means you're cropping off the sides and using the full height of your sensor. And it gives you a really nice image. It's still really detailed. So let's say you end up stopping the lens down a little bit, you want to see a little bit more sharpness. You're really going to see that on this camera, whereas cameras like the Alexa are only giving you a 2.8K image in anamorphic, and so you don't have as much detail as this. You're kind of below that 4K threshold on the Alexa, whereas this is just above that 4K threshold for anamorphic shooting. So this camera has a lot still going for it. It is pretty close to the image quality of the current V-raptor still. Has an advertised 16.5 stops of dynamic range, but the shadows aren't as clean as the V-raptor, I've noticed. So I would still rate this camera around 800, where you can rate the V-raptor up to like 1600 and still you won't see much noise. But I usually keep this camera around 800 or maybe a little bit lower if I'm still protecting my highlights. I really like the color science on this camera. They moved over to the IPP2 color science when these cameras came out, I believe with the Helium, and then the Monstro and the Gemini. They all have basically the same color science built in. And I think that's one thing I really like this camera for over my Canon cameras, is the color science looks amazing right out of camera. And it really has kind of that wow factor when a client's looking at it, I think. The I/O on this camera is pretty versatile. It's got an SDI port, it's got HDMI, which comes in handy a lot of times actually. It's got a control port, I think it's a 4-pin control, and then a sync port. I think you can adapt the sync port to do time code. And then it's got an audio input and I actually use this a lot with my Rode video wireless kits, and then a headphone port. And then of course it's got a DC and power port as well. As far as buttons, it's got a record button here on the left, and it's got another record button that doubles as a power button on the side. And this model came with the titanium PL mount, and I'm using the LEMO adapter for the monitor because I'm using the older 5-inch monitor. I've got the battery plate adapted right now. It's native gold mount right here, but I have an adapter plate that goes to V mount because currently I only have V mount batteries, but I'm probably gonna be getting some gold mount batteries pretty soon just to have a more secure connection to the camera. As far as power consumption with this camera, the camera pulls about 50 to 65 watts. I've read, and these are 160 watt-hour batteries, so I can usually get 2.5 hours on this battery, which is pretty good. So Red is a pretty big brand name when it comes to the camera market and between camera people. But even amongst non-camera people, I've noticed people know the Red brand, they know the Red logo. It's funny because there's definitely this kind of brand perception to where if you own this, like if you own the BMW or if you own like the Apple product, that you've like made it or something as an artist. And there's definitely a little bit of that going on with this camera brand. So when you show up on set and they see, oh, you have a Red camera, oh, okay, you're a professional, you must know what you're doing, you know, which is like, it doesn't mean that, but hopefully you do. So I have been making films and shooting videos, weddings, all sorts of things for about 10 years now. And I am glad I didn't buy a Red camera until now. Because up until this point, I haven't really needed one. If you've ever attempted to shoot like a wedding on one of these cameras, it's kind of a nightmare. The battery life is terrible. You run out of card space really fast if you're trying to shoot RAW. And it's just, in general, not a good idea for most things, especially for like event work. But once you get to music videos and more shorter content, like or a shorter deliverable, shooting on cameras like this make a lot of sense. Having a much more flexible image and getting all that color bit depth in there really does pay off in the end. So why did I buy a Red? Well, part of it is I just love cameras and I love playing with cameras and fiddling with the menus and seeing what images I can create as a cinematographer. I love to be creative. I love engineering also, so I'm always fascinated by camera engineering and sensors and processors. And this is basically just a computer with a sensor on it, you know? So the second reason I bought this camera is that it is a more professional tool for higher end clients. When you walk up with a Canon camera, typically it's going to be like a mirrorless camera. I've got the C300s and they look great. Like, don't get me wrong, they're phenomenal documentary cameras. But when you put them on set and you start shooting more narrative and more commercial work, they don't necessarily have that wow factor with the image. They don't have quite as much dynamic range. Their color science isn't quite tuned to be more, film-like, to emulate that film stock. And this camera really has a lot of that built in, some of that secret sauce. But the third reason I bought this camera is because I want to start getting bigger clients and I want to start shooting content that benefits from a higher resolution and a higher bit depth. Another reason I got this camera is that the clients that I currently work with are asking for it. And they're finally willing to pay what it costs to rent one of these cameras. For a lot of people, there's sort of the red trap, I call it, where they're just starting out in their first camera and they go buy a Red and they don't have any of the infrastructure set up on a technological level, a computer, a NAS, a bunch of hard drives and SSDs, and sort of a network of people around them that have the right support gear for this camera. Because really, it takes a crew to make, a movie or to make a commercial, and the camera is only one piece of it. If you don't have that crew around you, this camera doesn't make a lot of sense yet. It's not the right tool for the job yet. I love technology, and I really like the way Red as a company innovates constantly. They are constantly coming out with cameras. They're not like Arri. Arri comes out with a new sensor every 11 or 12 years. Red is all about innovating and pushing the limits of what camera technology can do. And that's great for innovation, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword if you bought an old Red camera, because chances are in a couple years they're going to come out with a new Red camera that is half the price and twice as good in some way, like frame rates. Now, with buying a used Red camera, you have a couple of other cons. One con with this camera in particular are the Red mini mags. These are still really expensive, actually. This 512 gig mini mag still goes for about $600 to $700, which is way more expensive than the cards for the Komodo X, which are about $130 for the same size if you get the Angelbird one. Right now, this camera kind of ticks all the boxes for me. It does 8K Super 35 at up to 75 frames a second in the 2.4:1 crop mode. It's got really great color science right out of the camera. It's got enough outputs to satisfy like most of my production needs with SDI, HDMI, and then an internal monitor here. It's got good enough battery life for most of my things. It's got an interchangeable mount, which is really solid, and I like it a lot. I really like the use of compression ratios on this camera. It gives you such a fine-tuning like control in comparison to the newer DSMC3 lineup. There's a LUT that I like to use with this camera. It's actually built into the cameras, I think when you update them. It's the film bias LUT. I believe Phil Holland developed this LUT for the Red cameras, and they include it with all the updates, and I really like it. I think it takes Red's color science to a much higher level, really almost on par with the Alexa cameras. What a lot of people get kind of pumped up for on this camera is the reframing potential in post for 8K. Because I know David Fincher does it on a lot of his stuff to kind of create perfectly symmetrical shots, and I am not one of those people. I don't really do that. I like to kind of keep it in camera. If I'm not getting it in camera, I don't want it to be perfect, and at the same time, I don't want to reduce the image quality at all, ever. So I think what I want everyone to get out of this video is that it's not always about the latest, greatest, shiniest toy. The Komodo X is a great camera, but once you kit it out, it's not a $10,000 camera. It's about a $15,000 camera. Once you get cards, monitors, and batteries, that's a really expensive camera. Getting something like this for less than $10,000 now, if you can find it, I think is a better investment in a lot of ways, because it's already depreciated and it's still a workhorse. If you've used these before and you're familiar with these, I think this is the better camera for me for what I'm doing with my clients right now. Thanks so much for watching the video, guys. I'm gonna throw up some shots of stuff I've been getting with this camera. And don't forget to like and subscribe and keep creating.